All right. The Jesuits have been a very important influence on Catholicism since the 16th century, and they actually can probably credit their existence to a small military battle between France and Spain at Pamplona in the year 1521. Let me explain. So, the French attacked the city and faced very little opposition from the vastly outnumbered Spanish, okay, except at the citadel. All right. This is where a 30-year-old noble by the name of Ignatius of Loyola was making his last stand. He apparently was the one who initiated the defense, not wanting to retreat. And the Spanish did offer a heroic, if perhaps unwise, stand against the French. During the battle, a cannonball hit Ignatius's legs, injuring him horribly, but he survived. The French were so impressed by his bravery that actually they tended to his wounds once they took the citadel. And days afterwards, he was taken home to his family's castle in Loyola. It was there that he had just a miserable recovery that lasted about a year. He had numerous surgeries on his basically shattered legs, and he would always walk with a limp. All right. And during this time, though, he, maybe not surprisingly, reassessed his life. Okay, as the story goes, he was in bed recovering, and he requested something to read, preferably some romances. But he was brought only religious books. He read a 4-volume translation of the Life of Christ by the Carthusian Ludolf of Saxony, and also a collection of the lives of saints kind of arranged around the liturgical year. All right. He came to see St. Dominic and St. Francis as models to be followed. And actually, this makes a lot of sense when you start thinking about the mission of the Jesuits. Once his recovery was over, he had devoted his life to Christ. He pursued a religious education. First, he went to study Latin in Barcelona. Then he went on to different universities, ending up at the University of Paris. Super fun fact here, he and John Calvin were there at the same time, okay? But while in Paris, he became a part of a group of about 6 other students, and these men took vows together in the year 1534. Okay, so they aren't Jesuits yet. All right, the society has yet to be formed, but this is laying the foundation for the Society of Jesuits. All right. Later, this group of friends meet in Venice with plans to head on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Okay, but they decided that if the trip falls apart, they were going to go to Rome instead and offer their services to the Pope. Well, the trip falls apart due to the fact that the Venetians and the Ottomans had gone to war, and so this group of men headed to Rome to offer up their services. All right. Now, what's interesting is the College of Cardinals was really, really wary of this group. But the Pope at the time, Pope Paul III, who called Trent, issued a papal bull that transformed this group into a proper order, the Society of Jesus, or better known as the Jesuits, in September of 1540. Okay. Now, I want to note the dates here. Okay, this is 6 years before Luther died. This is in the midst of the Reformation, yet the Jesuits were actually not founded to fight against the Protestants. Oftentimes, this is sort of how it's laid out, how, like they're created to fight the Protestants. That was really not the intention of the original founders. Yes, the Jesuits have a missionary focus. Yes, they did definitely leave some efforts this would actually be an appropriate use of the word counter-reformation efforts in certain countries that did convert to Protestantism, okay, but that was actually not why they were founded, okay. So the growth of the Jesuit order is astounding, all right. So in 1540, when they were founded, they had 10 members. By 1556, the order had grown to 1,000 members, all right? So in about 16 years' time. By the year 1600, the order had 8,500 members. By 1679, the order had grown to over 17,000. And in 1750, the order reached its peak membership with over 22,000 members. All right, this will not be the last time we hear of the Jesuits. They pop up kind of periodically from here on out in this course. All right, but let's turn to Teresa of Avila for a few minutes before we end. Like Ignatius, Teresa is born into this particular Spanish context, okay? She was also born into an aristocratic family. Interestingly, her father's family was Jewish, but had converted under the reign of Isabel and Ferdinand when they had ordered all Jews to either convert or be exiled from the country. Okay, there's actually some debate in the historical community about whether Teresa knew about this or not. Teresa was born in the year 1515, so she was 2 years old when Luther posted the 95 Theses, okay? She, of course, knew of Luther. She makes some references to Lutherans in the interior castle even, but likely she probably never had access to Luther's writings or anything like that. In fact, in the interior castle, she's talking about Lutherans, but she's talking about what's happening in France. So it's actually, I'm not even sure if they were Lutheran or if she's just using the term Lutheran for Protestants in general at that point. Okay, but of course, with the Reformation going on, the Inquisition is particularly zealous during her lifetime. Actually, maybe I have not mentioned this. Okay, but in this time and place, nope, I'm going to talk about it more in week 4. In Spain at this time, the Inquisition is actually under the control of the state, not the church. So the Inquisition is particularly active, let's just put it that way. Okay, and the Inquisition definitely plays a role in her life. Some of her favorite books have been banned. Some people she knew was charged with heresy. All right, this is not like a distant thing. It is ever present in her life. Okay, so as a young woman, she joins the Carmelite order. Who are the Carmelites? They were a group who began on Mount Carmel in the 1200s. Basically, it was a small group of Europeans had gathered there. We know very, very little about this first group. They were at Mount Carmel for maybe 100 years. By 1290, all the Christians were out of the Holy Land, and so they left and went back to Europe, and they became a mendicant order like the Dominicans, the Franciscans, the Augustinians. Okay, so she joins them. I don't think at this point she had a huge passion for being a nun, but she definitely thought it sounded better than getting married. All right, and so she joins this large and relatively lax Carmelite convent. They weren't cloistered, actually. She would go and she'd visit friends and family. She would have people visit her in the convent. It did not stop her social life, and she really did enjoy her social life, at least at this point in time. But eventually she has this very, very profound religious experience. She becomes incredibly serious about her faith. She starts experiencing miracles, and she becomes this great reformer within the Carmelite order. She ends up founding at least 14 communities, and most of those are still active today, amazingly. All right. She is one of the better known Christian mystics in history. Of her many experiences that, she talks about, she had visions, ecstasies, levitations, trances, encounters with otherworldly beings. She had kind of visions that imparted her with theological knowledge. This is something like Hildegard of Bingen talks about too. She saw Jesus, angels, demons, the dead. She spent an excruciating few moments in hell. All right. And she also had a vision of heaven. All right. There were many reports of her levitating. Kind of funny. She found this incredibly embarrassing and prayed to have it stopped. All right. So all of this is happening, and it's making her kind of famous, but it's also bringing concerns from the Inquisition. All right. So interestingly enough, her first writing, all right, her Vita, her autobiography, came about because she was ordered to write it by the church so they could examine her theology and make sure it was orthodox. Okay, so she definitely wrote this under a bit of a cloud of anxiety, right? The church did deem her visions and experiences real and that her theology was orthodox, though they decided not to publish her Vita during her lifetime, but some people did get their hands on it anyway. Her second book that she wrote is The Way of Perfection. A lot of vernacular prayer books had been banned. So she produced this guide for her sisters. So when you read it, it kind of feels like she's writing to a friend, because she was writing to her sisters in the convent. And then at the age of 62, she was asked to write about her life again, this time as a sort of spiritual autobiography. In fact, she was ordered to write it. And she didn't want to, and she makes her feelings known in the book. There's actually some really funny parts in it. It's a good book. She's a great writer. But this becomes The Interior Castle, which is considered an absolute masterpiece of Spanish literature. Okay, so that is kind of just a real quick version of Teresa. There's tons of books on her. You can read all of her writings. They're very accessible. Just kind of, I've read all of her books and I like them all, though I think her autobiography is probably the most enjoyable to read.